Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc, here with my lovely wife, Janae, the Carb Addiction Mom. And if you've been following our series, you'll know that Janae is currently pregnant. In fact, right now she's 26 weeks pregnant. Yes, there is a little baby bump right here, tiny little baby bump. And in this episode, we're going to talk about salt, swelling, edema, and fluid shifts during pregnancy. One of the key concepts that a lot of women struggle with during pregnancy is they swell up like toads. Yeah, I know Janae and I have discussed that little concept before, but it's amazing how pregnant women, as a pediatric surgeon, I see this a lot. Pregnant women just swell up like crazy. Their legs, their ankles become enormous. And a large part of the burden that they have is this massive fluid volume shift. Well, early on in pregnancy, to support a fetus, especially as the placenta is growing, women's blood volume increases by about 30 to 40%, but also the hormones of pregnancy cause a dilation of the blood vessels. The pipes get wider, and therefore the blood pressure typically drops. In fact, when blood pressure starts to go up, that is a huge concern for obstetricians because hypertension can lead to a disease called preeclampsia, which is one of the commonest causes of early fetal loss and later on in the pregnancy. And preeclampsia is a devastating condition, and it's predicated by a massive volume increase and fluid accumulation and then blood pressure rise. One of the things that you'll notice about Janae is she looks completely fine. She doesn't look swollen. Her face, the rest of her body, her ankles, there's no evidence of swelling. It's a little bump that at 26 weeks is 13 pounds of weight gain. And the two reasons why that has happened is primarily because Janae is completely ketogenic. She's on a completely keto diet, number one. And number two, she consumes a huge amount of salt. Contrary to popular thinking, or the populist thinking out there, the human body is designed to use salt, sodium chloride, as its primary intravascular regulator of blood fluid and blood volume. And if you don't have enough salt on board, then that fluid leaks out into your tissues and you swell up and you can't get it back inside. The other thing that happens with salt, when you don't have enough salt on board, your body preserves that salt and it gets you to pee out magnesium and calcium and potassium that often are in short supply and cause a lot of muscle aches and cramps and misery for the pregnant woman. And then the other key thing to understand is that our blood volume, or our blood space, very tightly regulates our sodium around 140. 2 or 3 points up, 2 or 3 points down, but very, very tightly regulated. Whereas blood sugar can change massively if you eat carbohydrates. Even for someone who doesn't, there's daily fluctuations. And sugar and salt act exactly the same. Sugar retains water, but the problem is we use up the sugar or we store it and we convert it to fat. Now you're left with this huge amount of water in your cells, in your blood space. And if you don't have enough salt on board, you can't pee that out. So it filters out into your tissues and you swell up like that veritable amphibian that I just described. So one of the things that is critically important is managing fluid volume. You want enough volume for the baby and for the baby's amniotic fluid to grow, but you want a high salt, ultra low glucose content, which helps you to manage that pregnancy in a non-bloating fashion. So I'm going to have Janae talk about what she's done to keep herself this way and to radically reduce her risk of pregnancy-related hypertension, preeclampsia, and the worst of those syndromes called the HELP syndrome, which is where the inflammation causes your platelets to aggregate, you start bleeding, and it's an awful condition that results in many maternal and fetal deaths in pregnancy. Something that they screen for all the time. We see proteinuria, we see protein spilling out in the urine, we see the blood pressure going up, and all of those are directly related to the type of diet and the amount of salt you're consuming. I can't say you're going to negate HELP syndrome or preeclampsia, but you can radically reduce the incidence by cutting out sugar. In addition, if you don't eat carbohydrates, there's zero risk zero risk of type 2 diabetes. So Janae, what have you done in terms of your diet? How have you prepared yourself to give yourself the best fluid management as you go through this pregnancy?
Yeah, I think the important thing is, like Rob said, I didn't really have to do anything. It was things that we were already doing anyway. So the very low carb, high fat diet, and then salt. I would say I increased my salt even maybe a little bit more than I usually do. We love the real salt, the Redmond's real salt. So we have the shaker on the table at every meal. And I think I just added a little extra salt. I also did have some of their electrolyte drink that I actually found very good early on when I had some nausea and things as well. So that was very helpful as well. And then for any of you who follow me on Instagram at CarbAddictionMom, you'll see when I take my bump pictures in the mirror to show progress, I do have a medical grade patient vitals monitor in the room. That's the benefit of being married to a doctor, where he's been able to actually take EKGs of the baby, but also makes it very easy to monitor my vitals. So just kept a very good track of vitals, because there were days that I felt maybe a little tired and my blood pressure might be a little lower than usual, but I've been running about 90/50 or 95/55. In terms of my blood pressure. So we've just been keeping an eye on that and monitoring that as well. But yeah, it was pretty easy because it was, the low carb was already existent in our life, and just adding a little bit of extra salt. So.
And what have your typical numbers been on that sophisticated monitoring we have in our bedroom? What have your blood pressure saturation numbers been?
My saturation's always 98, 99. My heart rate is usually around 55, 60. And then, like I said, my blood pressure's pretty much been around 90/50 consistently.
And how do you feel at that blood pressure? Most people, that pressure's way too low. How do you normally feel at that pressure?
I feel completely fine. That's absolute state of, I guess, homeostasis for me, because I feel completely fine. I don't feel weak or lethargic or anything. So.
One of the other things that Janae and I have done through the pregnancy, I don't think you've got it on today, but we use a CGM a lot to give us feedback about her blood sugar and what she's doing. And the CGM, we've either used the Freestyle Libre or the Dexcom 6, and it gives us incredibly good feedback about what's happening in Janae's bloodstream, because clearly her blood sugar is reflective of what the baby's seeing. Yes, the baby's liver now in the second trimester is making some of its own sugar, but through the placenta, that's also the sugar that's going to that baby. And then also the fact that she's eating the saturated fat, the 3 and 6 omega fatty acids, particularly the essential EPA and DHA precursor 3 omega fatty acids, are critically important. And we're able to monitor blood sugar volumes and ketone levels. We use the Keto Mojo from time to time as a finger stick to monitor ketone levels and blood sugar levels. And typically Janae is in the 0.5 to 1.5 range with her ketones. And blood sugar is typically between about 65 to 80, at the lower side of that range. Sometimes it may go a little higher up in the early morning, but typically pretty darn flat at that level. And the CGM gives us really, really good feedback. So that's part of the framework that we're monitoring Janae with. And it's done for the science of it, but it's also pretty darn cool to see those numbers effectively work out. And even when every doctor out there is desperately trying to test us for preeclampsia, testing the urine for protein, testing the urine for sugar, and is always kind of surprised when they see ketones in the urine. They're like worried. And we kind of have to calm them down and say, it's okay, there's nothing bad here. She's on a ketogenic, but we're okay. And the less we actually talk to them about it, the happier they are, because they love the results, they love the numbers, but they can't reconcile sometimes the numbers with how we get there. And that's a challenge. One of the next series, the next episode that we're going to talk about is what I call keto pressure, which is in the world out there tells us how dangerous and harmful doing what we're doing is. And Janae will talk a little bit about how she deals with and overcomes those as a door-opening, authoritative person. But Please understand the enormous medical importance of salt, of not having sugar on board, and of being in control as best you can about pregnancy-related hypertension, proteinuria, preeclampsia, and the HELP syndrome that is so devastatingly dangerous to both mother and baby in the latter stages of pregnancy. Plus, your overall comfort is mitigated by the massive amount of weight you do or do not gain. 13 pounds at 26 weeks.